America's daughters are crying for help. Trump's next move is unstoppable. Rachel found Emily curled up in the corner of her bed, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. The sight sent a stab of panic through her. Her 12-year-old daughter had always been a bright, confident girl, but lately something had changed. Rachel knelt beside her, voice soft but urgent. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Emily hesitated. "They keep telling me I don't have to be just a girl, that maybe I'm something else. But, Mom, I am a girl. And when I say that, they look at me like I don't understand myself." Her voice cracked. "I don't get it. Why does everything have to be so confusing now?" Rachel's throat tightened. She had been a teacher for 10 years before leaving the system, but never had she seen children burdened with existential questions before they even hit puberty. This wasn't education. This was manipulation. She stood, inhaling sharply, and grabbed Emily's backpack from the floor. Inside, along with textbooks, she found a colorful pamphlet stuffed between the pages of her science book. The title made her blood run cold. "Who you think you are might not be who you really are." Rachel flipped through the pages, lessons on how self-identity was flexible, how parents might not understand, how teachers were safe spaces for these conversations instead. Then, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. Frowning, Rachel set the pamphlet down and went to the door. When she opened it, there was no one there. Only a single envelope sitting on the doormat. No return address. No markings. Heart pounding. She snatched it up and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A confidential memo, marked for internal use only, from the Department of Education. Her eyes darted across the text, horror mounting with every word. A nationwide initiative funded programs designed to reshape the thinking of young students, that a psychological strategy aimed at dismantling traditional identity models by early adolescence. Her hands shook. The final section hit her like a punch to the gut. It detailed funding incentives for schools that followed these guidelines, millions of dollars in grants available to those who implemented these programs at the youngest ages possible. Rachel felt sick. They weren't just teaching this. They were being paid to. Her instincts took over. She grabbed her phone, snapped a photo of the document, and posted it to Facebook with the caption, "Parents, you need to see this. They are lying to you." The post barely had time to refresh before the screen went dark. Account suspended. Rachel's breath caught. They were watching. Then, from outside, the unmistakable sound of tires crunching gravel. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop in front of her house. Rachel froze. Her heart thundered as the car door opened. The air inside the Situation Room was thick with a low murmur of intelligence reports and the steady hum of classified briefings. President Donald J. Trump sat at the head of the table, listening as advisors droned on about foreign trade negotiations. His gaze was sharp, but his patience was thinning, until the door suddenly swung open. Jack Lawson, his senior aide, strode in without hesitation, breaking protocol. "Mr. President, you need to see this," Jack said, his voice tight. The room fell silent. Trump leaned back, gesturing for Jack to continue. Without another word, Jack placed a thick manila folder on the table. Across the front, stamped in bold red letters, "Confidential. Whistleblower file." Trump flipped it open, his eyes scanning the first page. His usual air of bravado faded as he read. The document was packed with internal reports, classified memos, and damning evidence. A shadowy coalition had been systematically reshaping school curriculums, targeting young girls under the guise of mental health initiatives. But the data inside told a darker story. Since these programs began, cases of depression, anxiety, and self-doubt among adolescent girls had skyrocketed. Trump's grip tightened around the papers. "This isn't just about education," he said, voice low, controlled. "This is about control." Jack nodded. "It gets worse." Trump turned the page. Schools that adopted the new policies received large, undisclosed grants, many funneled through third-party organizations. The deeper the changes, the bigger the payout. More disturbing were the directives. Teachers encouraged to bypass parents, administrators trained to handle identity concerns without notifying families. Trump exhaled slowly. His gut told him this was bigger than a few misguided policies. Someone wanted America's daughters confused, uncertain, easy to manipulate. A throat cleared at the end of the table. Robert Vale, Secretary of Education, leaned forward with a rehearsed smirk. Mr. President, this is just a conspiracy theory. Parents complain about curriculum changes all the time. Trump's gaze snapped to him. You're telling me this is a coincidence? That someone's just handing out millions of dollars for fun? Vale hesitated. Trump cut him off. I don't do coincidences, Robert. He tapped the file. I do facts. And the fact is, someone is paying to weaken America's future. The room was dead silent. No one met his eyes. Trump stood. I want names. Who's behind this? Where the money's coming from? And how far this goes? He turned to Jack. Start digging. I don't care how deep we have to go. Jack gave a sharp nod. Yes, sir. As Trump stepped out of the briefing room, his secured phone vibrated in his pocket. Only a handful of people had access to that line. He glanced at the screen. Unknown sender. A single message blinked across the screen. Mr. President, if you dig deeper, you'll find the funding leads offshore. This isn't just America's problem, it's global. Trump's jaw set. Now it was personal. Jack moved quickly, assembling a covert team of intelligence analysts, financial experts, and trusted investigators. Within hours, reports flooded in, each more disturbing than the last. The funding wasn't just domestic. It stretched across international borders, a tangled web of corporate sponsors, billionaire activists, and foreign entities pouring money into carefully structured educational grants. Buried within the fine print were incentives for school districts that implemented the most aggressive changes. The more policies that destabilized children's perceptions of themselves, the larger the rewards. Trump sat at the resolute desk, flipping through the latest findings. Charts showed a direct correlation between the rise of these programs and the spike in childhood anxiety, depression, and self-doubt. He tapped a page with his index finger. They're breaking them down so they'll accept anything they're told. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with fury. Jack nodded grimly. It's not just ideological. There's money in this. A lot of it. One name kept appearing in the financial records, Everton Global, an investment firm with deep ties to both corporate media and education policy groups. Their donations had quietly steered the direction of curriculum changes in multiple states. Behind the firm were powerful figures who stood to gain from a more malleable, uncertain generation. A generation that could be sold anything, convinced of anything, shaped into anything. Trump exhaled sharply. Enough. I want hearings. I want subpoenas. I want the country to see exactly what's happening. The moment the announcement was made, the backlash was instantaneous. Media outlets launched a full-scale assault, branding Trump as anti-education and anti-progress. Headlines twisted the narrative before a single hearing could take place. Primetime segments framed the upcoming investigation as a regressive attack on modern learning. Commentators lined up, repeating the same message. Trump was interfering with schools, stifling academic freedom, pushing outdated values. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, his closest allies began facing sudden, coordinated attacks. Business leaders who had supported him found themselves under IRS audits. Longtime political allies were smeared with decade-old accusations, dredged up from nowhere. A senator set to testify at the hearings was hit with an anonymous ethics complaint, throwing his credibility into question. Jack burst into the Oval Office, phone in hand. Mr. President, you need to see this. He tapped a news app. The screen flashed a breaking story. An alleged insider had leaked claims of financial misconduct in the Trump organization. An investigation was reportedly underway. Trump scoffed. That's cute. They're setting this up to drown out the hearings. They think I'll waste time fighting a fake scandal." He leaned back, expression unreadable. "Let them try." The White House press office issued an immediate statement, dismissing the allegations. Trump didn't waste another second on it. Instead, he pressed forward. The hearings were scheduled to begin the following week. His team prepared evidence, witness testimony, internal memos, everything that would expose how a generation of young girls had been used as pawns in a quiet war of influence. Then his phone rang. Not his work line. Not his secured line. His personal number. He glanced at the screen. Ivanka. He answered immediately. "Sweetheart." Her voice was unsteady. "Dad, someone just threatened my kids." Ivanka's voice was tight with controlled fear. "A man called my assistant. He knew the kids' school, their schedules. He even mentioned their favorite playground. He said if you don't back off, I'll regret it." Trump's grip on the phone tightened. "Do you have security on them?" "Yes. We moved them to a secure location." His jaw clenched. Threats were nothing new, but this was different. This wasn't just about him, this was aimed at his family. He inhaled slowly, forcing himself to think. Whoever was behind this was getting desperate. He had hit a nerve. "Ivanka, listen to me. Keep the kids close. No routines. I'll handle this." "I know you will." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the undercurrent of unease. "Dad, don't let them win." Trump exhaled, his eyes hard. "They won't." The next morning, he walked onto the stage of a packed press briefing room. Cameras flashed. The entire nation was watching. His team had debated whether to do this now, whether it was too soon after the leaked scandal and media attacks. He had shut them down. "We don't wait," he had said. "We fight." He stepped to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly into the camera. "For months, we've been uncovering something deeply disturbing happening in our education system. I'm here to tell the American people the truth." He lifted a document and held it up. "This is an internal memo proving that certain schools received millions in undisclosed payments to push psychologically destabilizing programs onto young girls." He flipped to another page. "Here's evidence that big tech actively suppressed parents who tried to speak out, deleting their accounts, censoring their concerns, labeling them as disinformation." The reporters were already shifting, whispering, glancing at their producers. Trump continued, his voice unwavering. "And this is a financial trail leading to offshore accounts tied to foreign interests. Interests that don't want our daughters to be strong, confident, independent women. Interests that want them confused, weak, vulnerable to influence." A murmur swept through the room. Reporters fired questions at him, but he wasn't done. Parents across America have seen the effects firsthand. They know what's happening, and they won't be silenced anymore. Outside, the streets were already filling with protesters. Parents, teachers, grandparents. The message was clear, enough. The backlash was immediate. Media outlets cut the feed mid-speech. Social media companies flagged his words as harmful misinformation. But it was too late. The dam had broken. By nightfall, school boards in multiple states were forced into emergency meetings, scrambling to answer for their backroom curriculum deals. Parents flooded town halls, demanding answers. And then, the final blow came from an unexpected place, a renegade school principal. In a viral video, Principal Mark Caldwell sat in his empty office, staring into the camera. "I can't stay silent anymore. I was told if I implemented these programs, our district would receive funding. I was warned not to ask questions. But the results," he exhaled, shaking his head. "Our girls are struggling. Their self-worth is crumbling. And now I see why." Then he held up a document. "This is proof that corporations funding these initiatives are also profiting from the mental health crisis they create. Therapy apps, pharmaceuticals, social media engagement algorithms. It's all connected." The video exploded across the internet before platforms could suppress it. The nation was awake now. Trump wasted no time. That night, he signed an executive order banning all federal funding for psychologically manipulative education programs and directed intelligence agencies to begin tracking offshore influence in America's school systems. The following morning, his administration received confirmation. Robert Vale had been caught deleting emails. Security footage showed him inside the Department of Education at 2 a.m. erasing internal files. IT teams managed to recover fragments, enough to prove his role in covering up the grants. Vale resigned before the hearings could begin. But as he packed up his office, Trump paid him a visit. The former Secretary of Education looked up, his face drawn. "You think you won?" His voice was flat, almost amused. "This is bigger than you, Mr. President. There are forces that don't want girls to grow up strong and independent. They want them lost." Trump studied him for a long moment, then leaned in, voice calm but firm. "Let them try." Emily sat at the kitchen table, twirling a pencil between her fingers as she flipped through her schoolbook. For the first time in months, Rachel saw something in her daughter's eyes that had been missing: peace. There were no strange pamphlets stuffed between the pages, no loaded questions planted in her mind. Just math problems and history lessons, the way it should be. "Mom, do you think it's really over?" Emily asked softly, glancing up. Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder. "I think we won this round, sweetheart." Outside, the world was changing. Parents who had once stayed quiet were speaking up at school board meetings, demanding accountability. They weren't being ignored anymore. The silent majority had found its voice, and the pressure was working. Districts that had accepted shady grants were now under investigation, and schools were rewriting policies under the weight of public scrutiny. In Washington, Trump signed the Education Transparency and Child Protection Act, a sweeping reform bill that mandated full parental access to curriculum materials, banned external funding from unapproved sources, and ensured age-appropriate learning for children. The law was airtight, leaving no room for loopholes. The media scrambled to downplay the victory, but it was too late. The damage had been done to them. The people had seen the truth, and they weren't forgetting anytime soon. The corporations that had bankrolled the initiative quietly began retreating, their influence weakened. But Trump knew better than to celebrate too soon. He sat alone in the Oval Office, the soft glow of his desk lamp casting shadows across classified reports stacked in front of him. He flipped through the latest intelligence briefing, his eyes narrowing as he reached the final page. A single line was highlighted. "The same network is now targeting young boys." Trump leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingers together. They had tried to break America's daughters. Now they were coming for its sons. His jaw set. The fight wasn't over. Please click on one of the videos on your screen to watch another story celebrating the human spirit. If you enjoy meaningful stories, please subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on our latest uploads.